University and University of Colorado for several years. She's interested in teacher development, professional development of math teachers. And today she'll be talking about the problem-solving cycle for professional development. And I'd like to invite her to give her speech.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I know it's been a busy schedule so far. As Ismail said, I'm going to be talking today about adaptive professional development. I'm first going to talk about, define and discuss adaptive versus specified models of professional development. It's kind of a construct that my colleagues and I have kind of developed for particular reasons that I'll discuss today. Then I am going to talk about my program of research that is focused on an adaptive model of professional development that we've designed and researched, and it's called the problem-solving cycle. And lastly, I'm going to share a small study of impact, looking at how the problem-solving cycle intervention impacted middle school teachers' knowledge and instructional practices. So that's going to be my talk for today. And kind of, if you were here on Thursday, building off of some of the work that Julie did just to situate my talk today, never before in the history of education has professional development, has greater importance been attached to professional development of educators. I think this is interesting because Gusky talks about this in 2000, and this trend only continues today. There's an urgent need around the world for professional development, and this stems from the notion that the stronger and more effective teachers are, the stronger our students are, and they have higher student achievement. So the opportunities across the world are plentiful for professional development, but they do fall in different formats. That's something I'm going to note and talk about today. And this also is a little repetitive from Julie, that there's a shift away from the one-time workshop that teachers are required to go to that often isn't very connected to their lives as teachers. They're usually overly fragmented. They're not connected to classroom practice or their students. They're out of line with the current theories of learning, and they're disconnected from the school site itself. So my colleagues and I recently, 2010, we wrote an encyclopedia chapter that synthesized the research on professional development. And what we noticed in our synthesis was that we could kind of collapse most everything that's been written about effective characteristics and features of professional development in two ways. One by content, and the other by process and structure. So this further, I think, synthesizes some of the individual reports that Julie talked about. And we know that the content for effective professional development is situated in practice, and that it's focused on students' learning. We also know that the process or structure for effective professional development, they usually have facilitators model the practices that they want students to use. Teachers are actively engaged in inquiry. They're analyzing their own practice, analyzing that of others, and really giving feedback to one another on instruction. And the professional learning communities are established, whether that's within a school building or some teachers form a professional learning community across a district. And that these professional development opportunities are ongoing and sustainable. So that synthesizes kind of all of the things that we know about good, effective professional development. And what's really interesting about that is if you look at the newer professional development models, the different opportunities that are out there for teachers, one would think that these models must look really similar and that there would be a lot of things about them that are alike. But actually, that's really not the case. And so we find this really interesting, and so we were trying to think about what's that mean and how can we distinguish the differences if they have those similar characteristics, the content and process, what's different about them? And that's kind of when we came up with this idea of looking at professional development through an adaptive versus specified lens. So in terms of, if we look at adaptive models, you can see that they're designed to be readily responsive or adapted to the goals, resources, and circumstances of the local context, whether that's a school or a district. And additionally, they're based on evolving guidelines. They could change over time, and they inherently are. Versus a highly specified model where the goals and the resources and the facilitator materials are typically published. They're there for those to use, and they are supposed to provide a predetermined experience that's finite. There's a starting point and an ending point. So let's take a look at the continuum. So here's the continuum, and I kind of moved from highly adaptive to highly specified. And if we use an example that most people around the world know, and again, Julie spoke a little bit about it on Thursday, Japanese lesson study. I would consider Japanese lesson study to fit in the adaptive side of the continuum, probably above where I have the PSC, which is standing for the problem-solving cycle, the model that I'm going to speak about today. So lesson study, as we know, and most of us are probably familiar with, teachers from a school or across the district get together and they research and plan one lesson, and they have a teacher teach that lesson to a group of students, and the rest of the professional development participants stand in the back and observe, take notes, and then there's a long debriefing period. And in that debriefing period, they talk about the students' understanding of that math in the lesson, and the teachers talk about the instruction that the teacher used, and they refine and revise that lesson plan to further perfect it. Okay, so that's the structure. And occasionally there's one expert that comes in and helps support this process. So that's the structure of lesson study. The lesson content is chosen by the participants. The focus of the debrief is determined by the participants, whether they're going to talk about the student reasoning or the different ways to perfect the lesson. The structure's in place, but everything that's happening within the lesson study is flexible and determined by the participants. We could have two lesson study groups going that are very similar, but yet the goals and the resources used are completely different. So that makes it adaptive. And another example of highly adaptive, in the United States, we use something, there's a group of researchers that are doing video clubs with teachers. Beth Van Ness and Miriam Sharon kind of lead the way in that work, and that's highly adaptive. Their teachers come together in an elementary school and say, yeah, we want to work together, and they decide they're going to videotape their own teaching. So they go teach whatever lesson they want, they videotape it, they watch their own lesson, and they clip it. So they'll find a clip that they think is interesting that they're going to bring back to the professional development, and they watch and they talk about their lesson. So that's so adaptive because each participant chooses what video they would like to bring back to the professional development, what they want to talk about, A teacher's goals in the beginning could be they want to understand students' thinking, but then 2 months later it could change and they want to work on their questioning. So it's very loose and flexible. We would consider that highly adaptive. And then there's highly specified models, and I'll just go through one. But a highly specified model is a packaged model. So Nanette Segal and Mark Driscoll have a fairly popular linear algebra. It's Learning to Teach Linear Functions. That's the name. And it is created of 5 modules and extension modules. You have all the materials ready for you. There's a facilitator's guide that's very extensive. There's lesson plans, there's video clips. Everything is all supported in one packaged model. So that would be highly specified. Everything's given to you. The only question would be, is there fidelity the way the facilitator decided to use the materials? And in looking at professional development in this way, we're really taking a systems approach. We're looking at the whole of the professional development model, not just the features or the characteristics themselves. And we think it's similar to the TENS video study and how they viewed classroom teaching as a system embedded within a cultural context. We're talking about professional development as a system with a structure that includes an integrated set of features carried out in a given context. So we're taking a more holistic view of it when we're thinking about it from the adaptive versus specified framework. I mean, any model of professional development, if you've ever facilitated or participated in, you can kind of think about, if you think about it from a whole, where would it fit? Even if we're participating in or facilitating the same professional development model, we might place it a little in different places on the continuum based on how the experience was. And then taking a closer look, one thing that we found very interesting is that there's a striking difference in terms of research related to adaptive versus specified models of professional development, especially when you're looking to answer the question of impact. We really want to know in the field what is impactful, what kind of professional development has a long-term impact on teachers and therefore students. And although we have studies that show that there are impacts, we don't have a lot in the field. And so what we noticed was that when these different models are asking the same questions regarding effectiveness and impact, but different methodologies are being used to study them. So when we take a look at the differences in research among the models, in the adaptive approaches, there's many moving targets because the goals are evolving and they move across the course of the PD, these ongoing long-term PDs. Like I mentioned in terms of the video club, the goal's always changing and there might be multiple goals just in one PD. The materials usually relate to the teachers and their students in an adaptive model of PD. So they're not published, they're not the same. In fact, I'm going to bring a video clip of my own classroom teaching to the PD, that's the resource that's used. Or I'm bringing my own student work, and that's the resource used. Whereas in contrast, if you look at specified, the goals are clearly defined. So we're always studying in terms of research, clear goals, and the resources that are used are also all very clearly related to the goals. So if a video clip is going to be used in the Learning to Teach Linear Functions PD, that video clip is supporting teachers' development of teaching linear functions. And I guess the other thing is that it's just a matter of scale. So we could take a professional development that's run at a school site and really study it for effectiveness. It might be a little more messy and complicated in terms of a qualitative study. But the difference really appears when you're looking to scale. That's when we stop. There's not studies out there that are moving in that direction. I mean, even going back to lesson study, if you do a strong literature review on lesson study, it's very difficult to find any lesson study, or there's lesson study and study. You find very little research on the impact of lesson study, and especially at scale. So now I'm going to turn to my program of research and introduce an adaptive model of PD that we use, which is called the problem-solving cycle. So for the past 10 years or so, I've worked with two colleagues, Hilda Borgo from Stanford University and Jennifer Jacobs from the University of Colorado. We all started at the University of Colorado together, but now we're spread across the United States. And we designed and researched the problem-solving cycle model of professional development. And then more recently, we've had NSF funding for a project called Implementing the Problem-Solving Cycle, where we explored taking the problem-solving cycle to scale. And so we worked with one large school district. There were 11 middle schools in that district, and by the end of the project, we had all 11 middle schools participating in the project. So, and I'm going to talk about later one of the studies from that project. So before I do so, we'll talk a little bit about the problem-solving cycle. So it is a case of an adaptive model of professional development. It's supposed to be an iterative, long-term approach to professional development, and it consists of a series of 3 interconnected workshops that are focused on a common mathematical and pedagogical experience for all the teachers. And this is the structure of it. If you start at the top, where that would be considered a workshop 1, and a workshop 1, teachers come together and they do a common math problem. So all the teachers in the middle school are going to do one common math problem, and they are going to really do some research and think deeply about the mathematics embedded in that problem. And they're going to develop unique lesson plans using that problem for their students in grades 6, 7, and 8. So students age 11, 12, 13. And then as they move this way, they're going to teach the problem in their classroom. And ideally, all of the teachers videotape their classroom when they're teaching that same problem. And then they come back to a workshop 2, which is on the bottom square. And at that workshop, there's a video analysis of student thinking and teachers' practice. And we foreground student thinking in that workshop, and we look at student work, and we look at video clips that the facilitator has selected for particular reasons about focusing the teachers on student thinking. And then in the workshop 3, it's the same thing. The only difference is that they would foreground teachers' instructional practices. So if they're looking at a video clip, the main probably frame of that or goal of that is for them to really reflect on their instruction. And this series, there's 3 workshops that usually takes place across one semester of school. So in the fall, they would have 3 workshops, say 1 workshop a month. And then just to see what that looks like, this is a workshop 1 on the left. You'll see teachers in groups solving math problems, talking about math problems. And then if you look to the right, the gentleman in the picture on the left with the hat on, this is his classroom. So he's now teaching that same lesson to his students, and it's being videotaped. And then in workshop 2, like I said, the focus is student thinking, or that's what's highlighted. And you can see they're going to analyze this piece of student work from their students, and then the photograph on the right is the group of teachers discussing a video clip. They've watched this video clip several times, and it's related to the piece of student work. And then for workshop 3, you can see the picture on the left is watching video of a student group. So in this student group, one of the students is trying to explain their solution strategy to the others, and the other students are very confused. So at first they're going to talk about what the math is in this problem, which is focusing on student reasoning. But the real goal of this is to help the teacher that taught this class how to move those kids forward. What are the different possibilities and opportunities that might be impactful? And as happens in many of our workshops, the photograph on the right is the teachers once again reconsidering the mathematics of the problem. It seems to always come back to their understanding of the math, their understanding of how kids reason about the math. So they go back once again and start doing math again related to the same problem, even at the end of workshop 3. So just to keep going back with that adaptive framework, how is the PSC adaptive? Well, you just saw the structure of it, but it's the facilitator that makes all the design decisions for the professional development workshops. They take into account the local context, whether that's the needs of their students in that school, whether it's the needs of the teachers, or maybe there's an initiative that the principal would like to be addressed within the problem-solving cycle. All of these things are considered. So there's flexibility in the goals, there's flexibility in the content, there's flexibility in how video is framed related to student reasoning, and there's flexibility in how the video is framed to focus on teachers' instruction. And all of the decisions take into account the needs and interests of the district, the teachers, and the school. So the implementing the problem-solving cycle. This is our last project that just ended recently. And we have a theory of action that kind of supported our work in this project. And I wanted to just give a little bit of an overview of the project itself. And this slide is kind of helpful in doing so. So when you look at the top, the research group provided professional development for teacher leaders. So what's a teacher leader in our project? A teacher leader in our project is, we had 11 middle schools, and we had teacher leader or leaders identified at each school site. So the problem-solving cycle was either facilitated by one person, which is considered a teacher leader, who was a teacher at that school, or it could have been co-facilitated because the principals, say, identified 2 people as teacher leaders at the school site. So we worked with a group of teacher leaders to train them to facilitate the problem-solving cycle at their school. So back to the theory of action. The research team provided professional development for teacher leaders. We helped them learn about the problem-solving cycle. We helped them learn about being a leader in their school and facilitating professional development. And then it goes down because the teacher leaders then provided professional development for the teachers, who we hope they would learn more knowledge and skills related to teaching mathematics, pedagogically, as well as content-wise. And that would lead to improved quality instruction, and which would lead to improved student learning. And the talk that I'm going to do today is going to focus on the impact that the problem-solving cycle had both on teacher leader and teachers' knowledge of mathematics and the quality of their quality instruction over the course of the project. So the research questions related to this project were, what is the impact of an adaptive model of professional development, which is the PSC, on the participants' mathematical knowledge for teaching, as well as their instructional practices. So we're going to look at both of those. And the participants in the IPSC the study was conducted from 2007 to 2011 in a large school district in Colorado. The number of participating teachers in schools varied every year, not always getting bigger and getting smaller, to the point where we had all 11 schools on board with teacher leaders at every school site. And the data for the presentation that I'm going to present is a little bit from early on. It's going to be from the first couple years in the project, from year 1 to year 2.5, actually. So it was when you're considering trying to figure out in study impact or how effective a professional development intervention is on teachers, like I said, with an adaptive model, it's sometimes tricky, and the use of some instruments to look at a large number were really important for us at this time. So we worked with Deborah Ball and Heather Hill early on in their development of the instrumentation that we used. So for the teacher's knowledge, we used one of the earlier versions of the mathematical knowledge for teaching instrument for middle school teachers. And we did a post actually program assessment. But since I'm doing the first 2 years of the project, I'm only going to do a pre-post for this talk. And this helped us, determine whether we thought their content knowledge changed in relationship to the content that we focused on. And then in terms of classroom assessment, again, we used an early version of the mathematical quality instrument. They call it the MQI. It's really mainly from Heather Hill and her colleagues at Harvard. And we applied the MQI to 61 videotapes of classroom practice. We videotaped every teacher every teacher leader and every case study teacher when they taught the problem-solving lesson lesson in their classroom, tongue twister. And so that was the problem that was aligned to the PD. So we did that every semester, and then we also would go in and videotape a typical lesson, just a lesson that they would have taught any day using their curriculum. And you can see that for the teacher leaders, we have a 1.5 years that collected a video, and for the two case studies, we only had 1 year. That's good. Okay, so the results. In terms of the changes in teachers' knowledge, if you look at the blue line, the larger one in blue, this total sample of 62 teachers, the average pre-test score was 66.5%, and their post-test was 41.9%. So we did see significant gains in their teacher knowledge based on that instrument. However, we don't have a control for this study, so we share these results, but take them with caution. And what gets to be a little bit more interesting is trying to take a look at the changes in their instructional practice after only 1 year. So this is a very short amount of time. There's lots of research in the field that says it's hard to see changes in instruction and changes in teacher knowledge from professional development. They say that it can take up to 3 years. So with that in mind, we're trying to see are there changes that we can make sense of? So the MQI is made up of 4 dimensions. Those are listed here: math richness, working with students, errors and imprecision, and student participation. So those are 4 large dimensions, and they have subcodes underneath them, anywhere from 7 subcodes to 3 subcodes. And what we did was we looked at all of the 61 videotapes every 7.5 minutes. And we scored every code on a 1 to 3, on a rating scale of 1 to 3, 1 being low and 3 being high. And we had 2 researchers that coded every single videotape and had iterated reliability that was above 84%. And so just to take a look at some of these results. This is for all of the teacher leaders and case study teachers PSC lessons. These are the lessons associated with the professional development themselves. And you can see, if you look at the green line, and we'll look at the solid lines first, those are the teacher leaders, you can see that the teacher leaders' errors actually went down from fall 08 to spring 09. But when you look at their, the other codes, you'll notice that the only one that went up from spring 08 to spring 09 was working with students. And the other 2 they went up and then they dipped down a bit. If you look at the case study teachers, we see similar findings or similar trends. Their errors kind of stayed the same. You can see the most improvement was with working with students. And so now we're going to turn and look at their typical lessons. So what happened when they were just teaching with their curriculum and their everyday practice? And interestingly, we see a lot of the same trends. If we look at the teacher leaders, their errors went down. We see this trend of moving up from spring 08 to fall 08, and then they see a dip down, except for with working with students. And that seems to continue to increase. And similarly, when we look at the dashed lines, those are the case study teachers. We see the same thing. Their errors decrease, their working with students continues to go up, and the others kind of basically stay the same. So, because we see one trend across those analyses, I decided to share that with you. So the subcodes for the working with students category where we saw increases were the following: remediation of student errors. And that is very, the way that Heather Hill and her colleagues have created the guidebook for this, it's for conceptual remediation. So it's not just helping someone. They need to be asking a probing question or something to conceptually remediate. Responding to students' mathematical productions. So instead of just responding to a student or doing their own thing, they're really listening to a student, or they're analyzing what a student's done in order to say something or make a response to a student. And then they have a overall working with students code. So here we're just going to look at the teacher leaders. And we're first going to look at the PSC lessons, which is the solid line. And you can see some interesting trends. I mean, I think the most interesting probably is the remediation of conceptual errors, where we see some gains in that in both their typical lesson and their PSC lessons. And then when we take a look at the case study teachers, these are all of their subcodes for working with students, and you can see that they had gains from fall 08 to spring 09 in all categories, and that the solid lines are their PSC lessons, and those are just a slight bit higher than their typical lessons. And so, just to talk a little bit about the summary of the results I just shared with you, we can see that participation in the PSC supported some modest improvement, some modest change in their math knowledge for teaching and their classroom instruction. We noticed that their PSC lessons, we saw more change than we did in their typical lessons slightly, and we noticed that the working with students category is the one that seems to be impacted the most, at least after their participation over the project in kind of the first 2 years. So this is, as I said, it's like one of a small number of studies that's trying to look at impact of an adaptive model of professional development, especially when you're trying to explore scale and adaptive models of PD. Again, like I said earlier, considering lesson study and the adaptive nature of lesson study and the few studies that really look at the impact that it has on teachers and students. There's two, and they're very recent. So there's such a small body of literature and research that's being done in this area. I think it's something that's really important. And our results suggest that an adaptive PD has the potential to improve knowledge and improve instructional practices over time. We have a newer study that is just published that takes into account some more data, and we do see some additional improvements in some different areas as the course of the project went on. And I thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
We have questions? Yes.
Yes, sure. Great.
Any questions?
I would like to ask, where do you put your problem-solving cycle to the STEAM movement, like STEAM?
To the STEM movement?
Yeah, STEM. How do you connect with your professional development workshop with the STEAM? Or STEAM?
STEM.
Science, technology, engineering, and
Yeah.
math. How do we see that? How do we see it fit?
Do you have any ideas about how to connect with those, your professional development?
Our like the math professional development with science professional development?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? So the question was, how does the problem-solving cycle,
Bitmiş olabilir hocam. Maybe the battery is gone.
should I answer?
Go ahead.
So I'll try and talk a little bit louder. The question was, how does the math problem-solving cycle fit in with the larger umbrella of professional development for science, technology, engineering, and math, or the first three? So there is a group of science educators in Germany that have been using the problem-solving cycle. It's the first group with a different discipline other than mathematics that has taken it up. And I think lesson study also has gone across disciplines because it's adaptive and because there's so much flexibility in the model. It obviously can be used across disciplines. We haven't done a lot of research in that vein, but definitely think it's doable because it's just a matter of defining what are the instructional goals and the areas of student reasoning that you really want to work on with teachers in different domains. It is a viable structure. Any other questions? Behind you. And behind you, too.
You said that the data that you presented it was quite early on within that cycle. Is there any more recent comparison with later years of the study, or is that still?
No, we do. So we have another piece that has been written that is a little updated with more data points that's been recently published in the Journal of Teacher Education. You can find that on ResearchGate. It's on ResearchGate now. Goes for
I'd like to ask you a question, sir. Problem-solving cycle is adaptive, you said, right? And also, one of the reasons was that the flexibility in the mathematical domain. And the question I have is, like, if you are giving the as the professional development, activators. If you are giving the problem to the teachers to solve, so how is it becoming, like, how is it flexible? And from whose perspective it's flexible? So with that, connection with that, like, how do you choose those problems? And another question, like, is there an example that you can share with us of such a problem that you use?
Okay. So the notion that we do select the problem and that one problem is used across all middle schools in the district, across all teachers, I mean, that's a structural issue of the problem-solving cycle that we chose in a design process because it obviously causes some issues and problems because sometimes teachers aren't sure we have to choose a problem that's open enough, that cuts across 6th, 7th, and 8th grade curriculum, something that's, I mean, it's very difficult to select the problems. But what we found was that using one common problem so that all teachers in an entire school district had a common experience that they could all talk about was a really powerful way of doing things. So first, that's why we made that design decision, and I think for the district that we worked with, we had resistance in the beginning, but not for long, because they realized that they had something in common to talk about when they did other things in the district together as math teachers. So there were a lot of benefits that actually came out of doing one common problem. But I can see what you're saying, that, well, that doesn't seem flexible if we're using one problem. But to talk to the flexible nature of that, we have another problem-solving cycle program going on in San Francisco. And it was important to the district in San Francisco that they didn't use the same problem. So again, inflexible in nature, they decided that they wanted a separate problem for 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, which obviously makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. So then all of the 6th grade teachers have a common experience, 7th grade teachers have a common experience, etc. So I don't, that's something that wouldn't go away from the fidelity of the problem-solving cycle in our minds if that wanted to be changed. But it was done that way, a very intentional design decision, and we've seen a lot of impact from that. In regards to how do you choose a problem, we've written about that as well, about what makes a good problem for the problem-solving cycle. These problems are modeling-like problems, and we call them rich tasks because they have multiple entry points and multiple exit points. They can be adapted to work with a variation, a range of grade levels and range of age levels. So it's tricky because one problem is going to take you through a semester. So I think we've written about it in terms of those design decisions so that if somebody wanted to choose their own problem, then they could do so. On the PSC website, I have it up there, John. Yeah, pscstanford.edu. That's our collaborative website. We have sample problems, sample student solutions. We have resources on there to respond to your question. And there's an article, I think, I don't know that it's on ResearchGate, but I do think it's on the PSC website about the selection of problems.
Okay, you talked about the teacher leader part.
Yes.
Have you all done any additional research on that? And when you started selecting teacher leaders, what were your criteria to decide who that person would be in the local building? And have you done any follow-up to research the influence of this project on developing teacher leaders?
So we have a whole we did a whole work, research on studying the teacher leaders. Okay, so yes, we do have research pieces that are published on research on facilitation, and we looked at the practices that teacher leaders more easily took up and were able to use in professional development effectively. And we also have written about those that are more complex and those that they struggled with in our analyses. So there's one in the Journal of Mathematical Behavior, and that is on ResearchGate. It was just published, I think, last year, 2014. And we have a couple, but that's probably the best one. And then she asked about what criteria was used to select teacher leaders.
Thank you all for